Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my April recommendations video for the Goodreads group monthly recommendations. I will leave that linked down below if you would like to go see what other people are recommending. This month's theme is survival stories, which have always been a favorite thing of mine. So without further ado, I'm going to get into the 9 books that I'm going to split up between middle grade, YA, and adult that I recommend as far as survival stories go. Now, the first one is going to be obvious, and I'm pretty sure everyone is going to be recommending this book, but that is Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. This is a story that I'm pretty sure almost every kid in America has read between, like, elementary and middle school. This is just one of the go-to survival stories of a kid whose plane crashes in the Canadian wilderness and literally just has to survive, and the only thing that he has is a hatchet. And I feel like this book is what opened up the world of survival stories to a lot of kids and the excitement of reading and how fast-paced reading can be. So I feel like this is just a staple when it comes to survival stories. And on a kind of different note, but by the same author, I'm going to recommend the Transyl Saga by Gary Paulsen. This is a random book that I came across like years after I read Hatchet, and I didn't even make the correlation between the author. But this is another survival story. He is just the king of survival stories. But this is somewhat different. It's about a boy who goes on a solo camping trip in the middle of the desert, and a huge beam of light comes down, and he walks into it and gets transported into a parallel universe, parallel world. I don't really know. You're not supposed to know. But it's pretty much his story about surviving there, finding human-like things there, and war, and how humanity is perceived on Earth versus this parallel world. It was just a really enjoyable, very quick read. It's a very short book, but survivally nonetheless. And this would not be my channel if I did not recommend this book. The Black Stallion by Walter Farley. This is probably my most read and well-loved book from my childhood. I have horses, in case you were curious. Horses are kind of my life outside of books. This book I just read over and over and over again, and I wanted to be Alec so badly. It's about a kid who is on a ship coming to America that crashes or, sinks. And aboard the ship is a wild black Arabian stallion, and they both end up alone on this deserted island, and they have to survive together until a rescue ship can get to them. I pretty much wanted to be Alec, stranded on that island with the horse, because he just spent his days galloping down the beach. That's like my life goal right there, so I would be okay not being rescued as long as I had a horse there with me, so I'm gonna recommend this book. Getting into YA books, I'm going to recommend the first book of a series that I absolutely despised, but I love the first book, and that is The Forest of Hands and Teeth by Carrie Ryan. This book I loved so much, and I thought it was such a unique and intriguing concept as far as zombies go. This is told from the perspective of a girl who is in a convent with a whole bunch of nuns, and the zombies aren't called zombies or the undead, they're called the unconsecrated because they're unholy, and it's pretty much her story of like finding out about what's going on in the world and escaping the convent and really discovering the horrors of the world. This book continues on into a trilogy of kind of a companion novel and then where they merge. I hated where this series went. That third book is one of my most hated books of all time, but I love this book. I thought this was such a unique take on a zombie survival story that I highly recommend just this book alone, just this one. I'm also going to recommend in the YA world, Unwind, or pretty much anything by Neal Shusterman, but Unwind is what came to mind when I thought of this. This is a story about kind of different perspectives of different kids who their parents have chosen to unwind them. Instead of the whole concept of abortion in society, this is a society where abortion is not an option, but the parents have an option to unwind their kids once they reach a certain age. If they're not happy with how their child came out, you can basically harvest their body for organs and essentially eliminate them. That was such an intriguing concept to me, and I flew through this book. It continues on to, I believe, 3 more books in this series. It's just, Neal Shusterman knows how to tell a wild ride of a story, and I'm always going to recommend his books. And the last book in the YA world I'm going to recommend is Life as We Knew It, and this is by Susan Beth Pfeffer. This is the first book in a trilogy that I listened to the whole trilogy, but this basically is an end of the world survival story, and it's told from the perspective of a girl who is stranded with her family in this house after you find out that this weird thing happened and the moon is pushed slightly closer to the earth. And this obviously sets off a whole slew of worldwide catastrophes based on like tides and magnetism. And it is just so unbelievably realistic. This series was so relatable to me that it was terrifying. Like, it was just a very real telling of it because it's told just from her perspective, so you don't really have outside influence as to what else is going on in the world other than what they hear from other people. And it's terrifying because not necessarily that it's realistic, but it's just really well told. And I really recommend this series, but this is the first one in the series. It's been around for a while, so you've probably seen it. Getting into adult books, I'm going to recommend a nonfiction book for once. That's a rare thing for me. And that book is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. He has written a lot of crazy survival stories, but this is a recounting of a horrible Mount Everest disaster. I had to read this for one of my English classes in high school or college, I'm not sure which, and I just remember reading this and being like, oh god, that was heavy, I have to go talk about this in class. A lot of death and misery happened in this book. But it was definitely an exhausting read because your heart is pounding the entire time. And it generally, I mean, there's not really a good outcome when it comes to a disaster story, but this is just, it's a harrowing tale and I highly recommend it. Next book I'm going to recommend is on a slightly lighter note, but I mean, it's still survival, and that is Station 11, and this is by Emily St. John Mandel. This book has been making the rounds on BookTube recently, and I'm sure is going to show up in a ton of recommendations videos. I really enjoyed this book as a piece of literature. The writing is just beautiful in it. It's told from the perspective of a whole bunch of different people over a whole big span of time. Basically, there is a super virus plague thing that wipes out most of humanity, and you read pretty much from when that occurs to way in the future when humanity is trying to piece itself back together, and you're following a traveling caravan of Shakespearean performers, and there's just a lot of interconnecting of the characters and of the timelines, and it was just told beautifully, and it was also extremely realistic how quickly a virus could spread, and I feel like that is honestly the most realistic approach to the end of humanity or the end of the world. And it's terrifying to read about. I'm gonna be honest, it was terrifying, but it was just a really, really good book. I'm gonna highly recommend it. And the last adult book I'm gonna recommend is Alive by Scott Sigler. This book I just recently read, and it is a heart-pounding and super fun read. It's not as heavy as a lot of the other survival stories mentioned in this video. It's very much fiction. It is not extremely relatable, but you are just, it's just a wild ride of a book. It's one of those books where you want to go in not knowing anything because the characters pretty much just wake up, have no idea where they are, how they got there, who they are, what their past is, and what's going on, and you just kind of follow them through it and try and survive with them. And it's a wild ride of a book. I'm gonna highly recommend this book if you're looking for like a one-sitting read. This one's it. So that's gonna be it for me this video. Those are the books that I'm going to recommend as far as survival stories go. Definitely check out the Goodreads page because there are always amazing recommendations on there, and I will see you guys next time.